Hello, explorers. Today we are going to talk about the Great Compromise. If you remember when we last left our colonial leaders, they were at the Constitutional Convention and they just could not agree on delegates, how many delegates should be sent from each side. So, as good leaders, they came up with a compromise. A compromise is when both sides give up something so that they can work together. If you have brothers or sisters, you might have to compromise sometimes. Both sides give up something they want to work together. So at home, you might have a compromise like this. Let's say you and your family are trying to decide what you want for dinner. And mom wants spaghetti. And dad wants sandwiches. And you want chicken wings. So you're not getting anywhere, you're getting hungrier, everybody's arguing, but maybe somebody says, well, what about pizza? Say, okay, well, I really wanted chicken wings, but I'm going to compromise. I am going to say, okay, let's have pizza. If we can work together, we're going to have pizza. Okay, I am going to show us a video in Gallipade, so let me scoot over here, and we're going to watch this video. I know it's kind of cut off here.
In 1787, delegates to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia agreed to write a new constitution, but there were several big issues to tackle. The biggest question of them all was about representation. The delegates asked, how many representatives should each state be allowed in Congress? At the convention, two different plans were proposed, the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan. Virginia was a large state with a high population. The Virginia Plan, also called the Large State Plan, said that representation in Congress should be based on population. It said, shouldn't states with more people get more representatives in Congress? The Virginia Plan also called for a bicameral legislature. That means Congress would have two houses. Small states didn't like the Virginia Plan. They worried large states would always have more power in Congress than small states. Instead, the New Jersey Plan, also called the Small State Plan, called for equal representation. Every state would have just one representative. That way, every state, regardless of size, could have an equal voice in Congress. The New Jersey Plan was different in another way, too. It called for a unicameral legislature with just one house in Congress. Naturally, most large states sided with the Virginia Plan, and most small states sided with the New Jersey Plan. The debate lasted for weeks. At one point, small states got so frustrated they threatened to abandon the convention altogether. Thankfully, Benjamin Franklin, the oldest delegate at the convention, urged the others to reach a compromise. After much thinking and many long arguments, a delegate from Connecticut named Roger Sherman came up with a solution. Sherman suggested a bicameral legislature. Congress would have two houses, an upper house called the Senate and a lower house called the House of Representatives. The Senate would be based on equal representation. Each state would be allowed one senator. This pleased the smaller states with lower populations. The House of Representatives would be based on population. A state could send one representative for every 30,000 individuals living there. This pleased the large states with higher populations. In the end, both sides agreed to Sherman's plan, and the deal became known as the Great Compromise of 1787. It took lots of hot air, yelling, and exhausting speeches, but an issue that could have ruined the convention ended in success. Today, the Senate has a total of 100 members. To give equal representation, each of the 50 states is allowed two senators, no more, no less. The House of Representatives has 435 members. States with larger populations like California and New York are allowed to send lots of congressmen, while states with smaller populations like Hawaii and Nebraska are only allowed to send a few congressmen. In the House, it all depends on population. So remember, it all started at the Constitutional Convention. Thanks to the Great Compromise, states both large and small are represented fairly in the two houses of Congress we have today.
All right, so let me come on back over. Okay, so Robert Sherman, who was a lawyer and a representative and one of our founding fathers, had an idea. Everybody was fighting. Nobody could agree on anything. The smaller states were saying that they were going to leave the convention. But Robert Sherman was like, we need to work this out. And he had an idea. He had a compromise for everybody. Okay, so if you remember back in the Articles of the Articles of Confederation, Congress was divided into one house, so it was only one house. Well, Roger Sherman said, well, why don't we divide Congress into two houses? So Roger Sherman said, ooh, this is a good idea. Let's divide Congress. Congress divided into two houses. Okay. So here we have Congress. Let me do a different color. Let's see. Here we have Congress. And instead of just being one house, Congress is going to be divided into two houses. Okay. So over here we have the Senate. And in the Senate, all states have equal representation. Every single state sends 2 representatives. And then we come over here to the House of Representatives. Now, in the House of Representatives, representation is based on population. So the larger the state, the more representatives it has. So the big states send more representatives. The little states don't get to send quite as many to the House of Representatives. And this compromise, both sides had to give up something. Both the small states and the big states had to give up something. But this compromise allowed the convention to continue. Okay, now another hot topic at the convention was slavery. Okay. Slavery was something that was common in some states at the time. And at the convention they said, listen, we don't want the national government is not going to decide which states are allowed to have slaves and who's not. They're not going to have a say in it. Each state has their own decision to make here. So each state had the right to decide if slavery was allowed in their state or not. Each state decides if slavery is allowed. And some states said it was okay to have slaves, and other states said slaves, no, we're not having, no one can have slaves in the state. Okay. So then the next question came, well, should slaves be counted in the population to represent in the House of Representatives? Okay, so this was a big question. Should slaves be counted? And of course, the states that had a lot of slaves were like, yeah, we want them counted because the more people we have, the more representation we can have in the House of Representatives. And the states that said, no, we don't want slaves in our state, they were like, no, that's not fair. They shouldn't be counted. That's not fair. The southern states had the highest slave population. And unfortunately, Georgia was part of that. Georgia is a southern state. Georgia was part of that. So the southern states were like all about, yeah, we want them counted, so that they would have more votes in Congress. So, yeah, they wanted slaves counted. The northern states, where some of the states did not have slaves at all, they were like, no way, this is not fair. So, again, we came to a compromise. How great is that? Leaders can come to a compromise. This compromise was called the 3/5 compromise. Okay. And what this said was that every 5 slaves would count as 3 people. So they were not allowed to count all of them, but they were able to count 3/5 of the slave population. Okay, every 5 slaves counted as 3 people. So what that means is, let's say a state has a population of 500 slaves. We're going to make this easy. State has 500 slaves. That means that they would count as 300 votes. Count as 300 votes. Okay, so they don't get to count for 1 vote, but they do get a partial vote in Congress. Okay, that was the Great Compromise. All right, if you would like to learn more about the Great Compromise, your teacher should have assigned it in Gallopade 7.02. And right about in the middle, if you click on the go to, there is more information in the video we just watched about the Great Compromise. Okay, once you are ready, you are going to go to your social studies card in Canvas and go to 3.22, the Great Compromise, and answer the questions there. Okay, see you next time, guys.